Hello everyone, it's Snowflarky, and I'm here today to share my attribute reptile deck. This is a fun little deck for a casual duel environment that utilizes a series of level 7 reptile monsters that all came out in Strike of Neos. And there's one for every attribute. So we got a fire one right there, Firestorm Prominence. We got a water one, Silent Abyss. We got a wind one, Destruction Cyclone. And there's one for every attribute. So there's a light earth and dark one as well. And essentially what these card effects read is that when this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, destroy the face down, destroy all face down and non whatever their attribute monsters are on the field. So for this one, everything except face up fire monsters is destroyed. For Silent Abyss, the water one, everything except face up water monsters are destroyed, etc. And essentially, what this deck does is that we dump these cards into the grave, and we're constantly bringing them back with various revival spell and traps like Call of the Haunted, so that we always have presence, a present threat to wipe our opponent's board. Um, and this is a deck I made because I've always been a fan of the artwork of these cards, especially these two, Destruction Cyclone and Firestorm Prominence. Um, and I also thought their effect was fun, so I wanted to see if I could find a way to build this deck in my fun little dual night environment. And so, while not a competitive deck, if you have a casual scene, you can definitely do some fun stuff with these cards. Starting off with our monsters, I am playing two copies of Firestorm Prominence. This is the fire reptile that essentially when it's destroyed by battle, everything except face-up fire monsters on the field are going to be destroyed. And I generally find this one is the best just because usually there's, as far as decks with full-on attributes, fire is what I see the least. In general, though, if you were to play something like this, you would need to adapt which attribute reptiles you are playing based on your local metagame. So, like, for instance, if you knew a bunch of people who played Ignites, which is a fire deck, well, then suddenly Firestorm Prominence isn't good. So keep that in mind. These are just my ratios. In general, I find Firestorm Prominence to be the best one, just because I don't see too many fire decks. And overall, as you'll see, you should play a variety of them anyway, just so that you can always summon the one that's going to do the most damage to whatever your opponent is playing at this time. And so yes, Firestorm Prominence for fire. Next, we are playing two copies of Silent Abyss. This is the water one. Um, all these monsters have 2,000 attack and 1,500 defense, so they're not massive per se, and but you know, if you have them on the field, you can get little 2,000 damage pokes in if you've already wiped your opponent's board, and of course, you know, you can crash them to trigger their effect yourself. And 1,500 defense makes them easy to be walked over, which means your opponent can do so and blow up their board possibly. So yep, Silent Abyss, the water one. And next, we are playing two copies of Destruction Cyclone. This is the wind one, probably usually the second best, just because there's not a heavy amount of wind decks, but they all do the same thing. It's just you have the variety so that you can summon the one that is going to do the most damage. And their stats are all the same too, as far as like 7 stars, 2,000 tech, 1,500 defense. And then the last four monsters, we are playing a singular copy of Radiant Spirit. This is probably my second favorite one artwork-wise, because I like this little ghost light turtle that's going on. And probably the light and dark one are usually the least useful, but you know, I have it at one copy. Sometimes it's the one you want, so I have that. And that is it for the monsters being played. Next, we are moving on to our spell cards. For our first spell, we are playing three copies of Snake's Reign, and this is the lifeblood of this deck. Essentially, what Snake's Reign does is you discard one card to send 4 reptile monsters from your deck to your graveyard. So this is the card that you want to see the fastest. We want this card because all of these attributes reptiles, or as I said, reptiles. So what we want to do is get Snake's Reign. You ditch a card from your hand. If you have one of these element reptiles, definitely prioritize that because they're not useful cards in your hand, or otherwise get rid of the least useful card in your hand and dump 4 reptiles into the grave. Now, generally, you can do one of each different attribute, and that gives you a selection so that you'll be ready to summon whichever one is going to destroy your opponent's deck. Um, so this is the card. I had this deck idea for a while, and I had played it online a couple times, but I'd been holding off on building this deck just because Snake's Reign was a ridiculously expensive common for a while, and this deck was not good enough to justify buying it. So when I heard about the reprint, I knew I would finally be picking up this deck IRL because it wouldn't cost me much of anything. So Snake's Reign is the heart and soul of the whole strategy. Next for our spells, it's a lot of draw and search power. We are playing 3 copies of Pot of Extravagance. You're summoning 1 monster at a time. You won't go into your extra deck very often, so we're turning our extra deck into card advantage. Banish 3 to 6 random cards from your extra deck face down, and draw 1 card for every 3 that you chose to do so. You can't do any other. You have to play this at the start of main phase 1. You can't do any other drawing the turn you play this card, but that's okay. Going +1, it's nice, especially when we need more trap cards and whatnot. Digs the deck a little further. Good card. Next we have a singular copy of Card of Demise. This is a very trap-heavy deck, and it plays much like any Card of Demise deck does. Um, So, we use Card of Demise to fill up our hand up to 3. We have to get rid of everything at the turn, but most things are settable, so that doesn't turn out to be a negative. Um, so, get up to, a +2 off that. It's also another way to get dead reptiles from your hand to the graveyard, because it'll send everything to the graveyard at the end of the turn. So, Card of Demise is nice additional draw power. And then last for our spells, we are playing 3 copies of Pot of Duality. You mostly do special summoning on your opponent's turn. Your first turn is for setting up. This is mostly in here to either grab our Demise or grab a Snake's Reign if we haven't seen one. And since we really want that card, I want to see that card. So I'm going to play Pot of Duality. Reveals the top 3 cards of your deck, and then you take one of those cards and add it to your hand, shuffle the rest back into the deck. You can't special summon the turn you use Pot of Duality, and you can only play 1 per turn. So that is it for our spells. Next up, we have our trap cards, and there's a lot of them in the deck, so we're going to start off with the revival traps. We are playing triple back to the front. This card, you essentially target a monster in your graveyard and special summon it in defense position. So, of course, our targets are these attribute reptiles that we can summon right before the battle phase. Get one on the field. Then, if your opponent wants to continue battling, they're going to have to wipe their whole board. Um, so this is our favorite card to see for reviving them, just because it's chainable to spell and trap destruction, and it doesn't have the same stipulation as like Oasis of Dragon Souls or Call of the Haunted, where if the card is destroyed, so is the monster. If this card is destroyed, you just chain it, and you get your reptile still. So triple back to the front. 3 copies of Oasis of the Dragon Souls. This one, you target a monster in your graveyard, special summon it in defense mode. It becomes a worm type monster, which doesn't matter too much in this deck since we're not really doing anything specific with the reptile attribute, type. Um, and of course, if this card leaves the field, you destroy the monster, so you got to pay attention to that. But this is just another way to revive our attribute reptiles. And we are playing 3 copies of Call of the Haunted, the original trap card graveyard revival. Call of the Haunted, you just select a monster in your graveyard, special summon it onto the field in attack position. If this card is destroyed, that monster is destroyed too. So just another way to grab our attribute reptiles, and we play all those trap cards just because constantly spamming the reptiles back on the field for constant opportunities to wipe the opponent's board is what makes this deck kind of annoying in your to be dealt with. Next for trap cards, to continue just board wiping to our heart's content, we are playing triple torrential tribute. I'm a big fan of this card, just because it's a trap card that I find going decent. If it's great going first, and even usable still going second, because you can wait to use it on an opponent's follow-up play. But torrential tribute, you when a monster is summoned, you destroy all monsters on the field. So use this to interrupt combos, interrupt the summon, leave your opponent with nothing on board so that you can summon some reptiles on your end phase and poke for damage. Um, yep, torrential tribute. Uh, Good trap, blows up cards. Now, since we're playing a lot of trap cards, and I play with a group of people that are very fond on popping spell and trap cards, I am playing 3 copies of Waking the Dragon. This is just a trap card that says if this set card in its owner's control has left the field because of an opponent's card effect and is now in the graveyard or banished, you can special summon 1 monster from your deck or extra deck. We use these to summon powerful extra deck monsters that, based on what I'm playing and which one I pick, if I pick the right one, can just outright blow out the game. So this is kind of like an alternate win condition, and when you're playing this many traps, specifically in my group of players, there's lots of spell and trap destruction that people play because people do not like back row, and so if they're going to pop everything, I'm going to risk punishing. I'm going to have them risk a huge punishment by getting blown out by a big unstoppable monster from the extra deck. So 3 copies of Waking the Dragon. Definitely a card I would recommend if you're playing with a group of people or in some kind of scene that has lots of spell and trap removal. Next, we are playing 3 copies of Drowning Mirror Force. This is another kind of blowout card, and I think when you're playing a weaker power level deck like this, that isn't building a super strong extra deck board, you can boost yourself up by trying to cheese out some wins with these kind of blowout cards. Essentially, Drowning Mirror Force, when an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, shuffle all your opponent's attack position monsters into the deck. Now, as soon as you pull one of these on your opponent is going to be tempted to want to hit your back row because they don't want everything they just summoned to get shuffled back into the deck. And this is why Waking the Dragon makes a good companion piece with Drowning Mirror Force, because it's like, I don't want to pop cards because I don't want to give you that Raid Raptor Ultimate Falcon or whatever you're going to summon. But if I don't, I'm going to run right into a Drowning Mirror Force. So, it creates a painful dynamic for an opponent to deal with. So that is why we are playing 3 copies of Drowning Mirror Force. Next, to add to the pain, we are playing 2 copies of Storming Mirror Force. Of course, your Mirror Force ratios, if you wanted to play Mirror Force, could be adjusted. So, this isn't the end-all, say-all, especially since Mirror Forces in general metagame are not even good cards. But essentially, Storming Mirror Force, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you return all monsters on their side of the field to the hand. Well, attack position monsters. And so, this gets around monsters that can't be destroyed by card effects, things like that. So, it's a good card, and it bounces the whole field back to the hand if they're attacking with it. Get rid of some problematic monsters, open up their field for you to poke in some damage. So, Storming Mirror Force, solid use. Next, I am playing 2 copies of Heavy Storm Duster. Heavy Storm Duster, if this is a demise-based deck, so trap cards are good, and I'm not a huge fan of having to deal with back row in this deck, so I play 2 copies of this card to get rid of some problematic stuff that I run into in my scene. You know, it's you essentially target up to 2 spell or trap cards on the field and destroy them. You cannot use your battle phase the turn you use this card. So, you know, you play this during an opponent's turn, so the battle phase loss isn't a big deal. And if you can hit 2 cards with it, you know, that's +1 card advantage, of course. But it's not even bad, even if you're just trading 1 for 1, as long as you're hitting an important card, like maybe a field spell you don't want to see on the field, or a floodgate that is going to stop your deck. For instance, Macrocosmos or Dimensional Fissure would not be good. So 2 copies of Heavy Storm Duster. And for the last trap card, I am playing a copy of Skill Drain. All the attribute reptiles effects are effects that occur when the monsters are sent to the graveyard, so they are not negated by Skill Drain, because Skill Drain, you pay 1,000 life points to negate all monster effects of monsters that are on the field. So for these effects that resolve in the graveyard, Skill Drain doesn't negate, but you know, you can play Skill Drain, and you know, there are just a number of decks where flipping a Skill Drain on the right monster, negating a summon effect, can just end a deck's performance. And so, you know, I'm a big fan of Skill Drain, and in a deck like this, Skill Drain has a nice role to play in just stunting my opponent from building further. And in decks like this, you know, that kind of thing is important. And that is it for the main deck. Alright, so now for the extra deck, I'm mostly playing a Waking the Dragon Extravagance package, as you may have seen in a number of my other videos when I play Waking the Dragon. So the extra deck here is mostly just Waking the Dragon targets. I am playing 3 copies of the Last Warrior from Another Planet. So Last Warrior from Another Planet, if my opponent pops Waking the Dragon, this is one of the cards I can summon off of it. And if this card is special summoned, I destroy all monsters I control. But when this monster's effect reads that neither player can summon monsters. So if your opponent doesn't have any monsters on board, or any monsters that can deal with Last Warrior from Another Planet, when they pop Waking the Dragon, you can summon Last Warrior. Now they can't summon at all. All they can do is set, and sometimes that is enough to blow out and just auto win a game. So we're playing 3 copies because I am playing Extravagance, so you know, you banish lots of cards from your extra deck. So I'm basically trying to max out as many of these good Waking the Dragon targets as I can. So triple Last Warrior from Another Planet to stop my opponent from summoning. I am playing 1 copy of Raid Raptor Ultimate Falcon. Now, I would play 3 copies of this card if I had 3, but I only have 1, so I'm just playing the 1 card. This is a 3,500 attack monster you can summon off of Waking the Dragon that is unaffected by card effects, which means your opponent has to either kaiju it or find some way to hit over 3,500 attack, which oftentimes can be a game ender. If they can't deal with Ultimate Falcon, there are several matchups where just summoning Ultimate Falcon will stop your opponent from being able to destroy you. Give you free reign to attack with a 3,500 attack monster and do some big damage there. So only I would play 3 copies of it, but I only have 1. So but I am playing 3 copies of Geomathmech Final Sigma. This is a 3,000 attack monster that if you special summon it, if it's in your extra monster zone, which you usually won't be using for anything else, so you can put one in there, is unaffected by card effects while it's in the extra monster zone, except for Mathmech card effects. That usually doesn't come up too often, but so essentially, it's just a 3,000 attack version of Raid Raptor Ultimate Falcon. It does have the bonus that when it does battle damage by battling a monster, that damage is doubled, which is nice. So this is a good substitute to have. I would say it's usually not as good as Ultimate Falcon, just because the 3,000 is a lot easier to match and just crash to remove by battle than 3,500 is. But, you know, sometimes that double damage through battle is enough to close out a game really quickly. So it's another option, and we want as many options as we can get since we are playing Extravagance. Speaking of great targets, we are playing 3 copies of Blue Eyes Alternative Ultimate Dragon. This monster is a 4,500 attack monster that cannot be destroyed by card effects, and it cannot be targeted by card effects either. So unable to be destroyed, unable to be targeted. That's not as good as just being unaffected by card effects, but that's still pretty resilient and an extra 1,000 attack over Raid Raptor Ultimate Falcon. Um, Sometimes this card can just halt things in its tracks. Instead of attacking, you can destroy 1 monster per turn with its card effect. But 4,500 attack, that's a lot of damage it can do. So this card can close the game pretty quickly before your opponent can grab an answer. But another great Waking the Dragon target. Next, we are playing 2 copies of Naturia Exterio. Another card I would play 3 of if I had 3, but I only have 2. And essentially this card can negate any spell or trap card your opponent plays by sending a card from the top of their deck to the graveyard and banishing a card from their graveyard, from your graveyard. As long as you can do that, which as long as you can do that the first time, you'll be able to do because you're sending one from the top of the deck to the graveyard. You can negate spells and traps. There are some matchups where this card wins. I remember I was playing my brother's Necroz deck, and he got rid of Waking the Dragon, and I was like, Naturia Exterio, and then he couldn't ritual summon anything, so pretty much stunted the deck there. So, if it's a deck that's very reliant on spell and trap cards, and negating them would end the whole game, you can make Naturia Exterio. And then, of course, as my substitute for my third Naturia Exterio, I'm just playing 1 Nat Beast. This is the one that just negates spells by sending the top 2 cards from your deck to the graveyard. Spells are more prominent than traps, so sometimes this is just as good as Exterio, because all you would do with Exterio is negate spells anyway, but the added attack power and flexibility of Exterio makes it a better card, but Nat Beast is a decent substitute. And then just for my 2 filler spaces, these are filling my 2 other Ultimate Falcons. I'm playing 1 Baguska because you can summon this in defense to get a 1-turn skill drain where nothing can use its effects and everything's in defense mode, which could stall you a turn. That is cool enough for me to play that as a 1-of. And then Goyo Emperor, a monster that when it does 3,300 attack, and if it destroys an opponent's monster, you can special summon it to your side of the field. Kind of a cool effect. Could be in handy. Like I said, this one and Baguska are just fillers for Ultimate Falcons until I get 2 more Ultimate Falcons. But that is the extra deck all around Waking the Dragon. So that is it for my attribute element uh, reptile deck profile. Um, so yeah, this is a fun deck in a slower, if you have a slower, more casual environment, it's definitely a fun, wacky way to just blow up your opponent's board and be quite an annoyance. As a fragile deck, it crumbles to a lot of the good metagame stuff, so if you're dealing with lots of negates on board and whatnot, as per common in Yu-Gi-Oh, you can kind of struggle with that. Definitely give you some room to adapt some stuff for that. For instance, if if your opponent has monsters that negate, you'll need to pack a kaiju or something. If you pack kaijus, you want to make sure you're using kaijus that are different attributes than your reptiles so that you clear them out. You can throw in some copies of Winged Dragon of Raw Sphere mode to get rid of an opponent's big board, hand traps as you need. All that you can do to adapt to your metagame. If you don't you can play spell versions of spell and trap removal if somebody's playing Royal Decree or Chaos Trap Hole if you're having to deal with Denko Sekka. Just common things like that are big weaknesses to this deck that you can kind of build around. So, yep, just the big thing to keep in mind, your reptiles always have to be adapted to your scene's metagame, whatever people are playing around you, you need to make sure you have the attribute that is going to punish them the most. I showed the fire, wind, water, and light one here. There's also an earth one I'll show off, Raging Earth, funny looking card. and Umbral Soul, the dark one. Pretty cool looking card. All cool looking stuff. But yep, I'm pretty happy I was able to come up with this and be able to play it. It was quite my duel group got quite annoyed by getting their board wipes all the time when we had our casual duel night and I played this. So definitely fun. It's kind of similar to a deck I saw floating around on MBT's channel, the Thunderclap Skywolf deck. Um, which I would say is a better version of this same concept. Definitely check that out if you want like a better version that has a similar playstyle. But that is it for me. I'm going to sign off. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you when I got something new to show off. Later.